The sharp, frigid gusts of late autumn swept across the weathered brick facades of Maplewood apartment complex, swirling mounds of dead sycamore leaves over damp concrete walkways, slick with weeks of accumulated rainwater. It was 9:30 at night, and the bustling daytime noise of this 20-year-old low-rise block had long faded into muted stillness. Only pinpricks of faint lamplight seeped through fogged, cracked window panes scattered across the building's facade. The motion sensor stairwell lights had broken down months prior, leaving most of the stairwell swallowed in unbroken blackness. A sharp stamp on the steps might flicker a sickly yellow glow for a heartbeat or two, only to sink back into suffocating shadow the instant the noise died away. A cloying, layered stench hung stagnant in the air, grease drifting from the ground-floor diner, mildew seeping from rusted pipework, and the unglamorous, thick scent of working-class domestic drudgery, a weight that settled heavy in anyone's chest who lingered within these worn walls. Elaina Hale hauled 2 overstuffed paper grocery sacks up the fissured concrete steps, her pace slow and deliberate. The thin paper handles bit deep into her pale, slender fingertips, carving stinging red indentations that throbbed with every small shift of weight. Her long, dark lashes drooped low over her eyes, forming a soft curtain that masked every tangled, churning emotion swirling beneath the surface, rendering her little more than a quiet, indistinct ghost melting into the autumn night's gloom. This marked the second full year Elaina had hidden her entire fortune and identity, living as a jobless, rootless, nobody wed to Ethan Carter. To every prominent figure within the city's elite business circle, Elaina Hale was a legendary, untouchable powerhouse. She had taken the reins of Hale Global Holdings at 22, rescuing a stagnant, fading family conglomerate from bankruptcy over the span of 4 short years. She expanded the firm across 4 core industries: luxury real estate, cross-border trade, digital media, and high-end hospitality, pushing the group's total market valuation well above $14 billion. A single contract signed by her pen could reshape the entire local commercial landscape. One carefully calibrated, strategic decision could make or break dozens of mid-sized enterprises. Every multimillionaire and veteran investor in the region clamored for a single audience with her, viewing a moment of her time as an unattainable privilege worth lavish sums of money to secure. Yet no soul within Maplewood apartment complex suspected that the woman who squeezed rush-hour public transit each dawn, haggled over every ounce of produce at neighborhood grocery stalls, and surrendered all her free time to scrubbing floors and simmering stews, held enough liquid assets to purchase the entire residential block outright. She had stripped away every trace of her public persona, abandoning custom-armored luxury vehicles, sprawling hilltop penthouses, and round-the-clock executive staff to cram herself into an 820-square-foot, 2-bedroom apartment. She traded couture designer blouses for faded cotton tees and 5-star fine dining for budget produce, willingly burying her razor-sharp business acumen beneath the monotonous grind of a working-class housewife's daily routine. 2 years prior, Elaina had crossed paths with Ethan at a citywide charity volunteer drive. Back then, she had spent months drowning in cutthroat boardroom conflicts and vicious corporate backstabbing, sick to her bones of every person who approached her solely to curry favor and chase her fortune. Ethan had stood out like unclouded sunlight amid all that calculated greed. His smile was unforced, his manners gentle, and there was no hidden transactional agenda woven into every word he spoke to her. For the first time in years, Elaina met someone who saw a person rather than a billion-dollar portfolio, and a fragile, desperate hope bloomed fiercely inside her chest. What if love could exist untouched by money, social rank, or transactional gain? What if someone could adore only her soul, ignoring the billions resting in her offshore accounts and the corporate empire she commanded? Driven by that fragile longing, she erased every trace of her public identity. She froze all personal investment accounts, sent her entire high-end wardrobe to secure climate-controlled storage, and moved into the cramped apartment with nothing but a small suitcase of cheap, plain, everyday clothing. She learned to haggle over 50-cent differences in broccoli prices, memorized every bus route's rush-hour timetable, and poured every spare hour into tending to Ethan and his family, devoting every ounce of her patience and softness to their fragile marriage. She clung to a naive, earnest belief that consistent self-sacrifice and gentle compromise would soften the Carters' hardened hearts, that unwavering devotion would dissolve their prejudice and win unconditional affection in return. 2 full years of unrelenting domestic friction had crushed every last shred of that hopeful illusion to fine dust. A thin metallic click echoed as Elaina pushed the ill-fitting apartment front door open, and an avalanche of shrill, mocking chatter crashed over her instantly, sharp enough to slice through the fragile peace she'd nurtured on the walk home. The living room blazed with harsh overhead fluorescent lighting, flooding every crammed surface with stark white illumination. The fabric sofa was packed tight with Carter relatives, great aunts, distant uncles, Chloe's gossip-driven college friends, all leaning in toward one another to whisper, point, and cast unkind judgmental glances toward the doorway, their collective energy thick with unmasked malice and voyeuristic curiosity. Margaret Carter, Ethan's mother, sat rigidly centered on the couch cushions, her face twisted into a permanent, bitter scowl as she ranted non-stop, spittle flying from her lips with every heated sentence. Chloe Carter, Ethan's elder sister, curled up beside their mother in a brand-name hoodie she'd splurged on months prior, piping in sarcastic, cutting remarks at every pause in Margaret's tirade, each jab perfectly calibrated to amplify the room's collective disdain for Elaina. The second Elaina stepped fully across the threshold, every pair of eyes locked onto her frame. Their gazes wove a tangled web of scrutiny, condescension, and shameless voyeurism, thousands of tiny icy pricks stabbing into her skin until her shoulders tensed involuntarily with discomfort. Elena's fingers tightened reflexively around the crinkled paper grocery sacks, a heavy, bone-deep weariness washing over her, tangled with a dull, aching bitterness that had settled permanently into her bones after 24 identical months of mistreatment. She did not need to listen closely to pass their conversation. The subject never deviated, not for a single family gathering, not for a casual weeknight dinner. She was poor. Her family background was humble, with no wealthy relatives to offer financial support or professional business connections. She held no prestigious 6-figure corporate career, which made her, in every Carter relative's eyes, a dead weight dragging Ethan's promising office worker future down into hardship and struggle. In every single conversation held within these 4 thin apartment walls, Elaina existed solely as a liability weighing Ethan down. In all the time they'd been married, Elaina had never once relied on Ethan's monthly paycheck to cover her personal expenses. Her untouched personal savings could fund every household bill for decades without his contribution, yet she deliberately concealed that truth to uphold her low-income facade. She scrubbed every surface, cooked every meal, ironed every dress shirt, and handled every minor family errand without a single word of complaint, yet none of her endless labor earned even a flicker of gratitude from Margaret or Chloe. To their narrow, money-obsessed minds, a woman without a lucrative career and affluent parents was inherently worthless, a parasite leeching off Ethan's hard-earned salary for rent and meals. "Speak of the devil," Chloe drawled, lifting her chin in Elena's direction, her cold eyes raking over the faded cotton tee clinging to Elena's frame before flicking dismissively to the sacks of generic produce balanced in her grasp. Her tone carried deliberate volume to ensure every person in the room caught her sneering remark. Here's our so-called dutiful wife finally dragging herself home. Spends all day lounging around the apartment, doing nothing, while my brother slogs away in the downtown office, and she still refuses to splurge on anything beyond wilted discount greens. That cheap, destitute aura is glued to her skin permanently. No amount of laundry detergent could ever scrub it away. A wave of stifled snickering rippled through the assembled relatives, soft yet unmistakable, wrapping Elaina in a suffocating cocoon of ridicule. Her long lashes trembled faintly, concealing a fleeting flash of cold contempt beneath her calm exterior. If this exact scene unfolded in the glass-walled boardroom of Hale Global Holdings, any individual daring to speak to her with such unbridled scorn would be permanently blacklisted from every business partnership she oversaw, barred from collaborating with a single subsidiary under her corporate umbrella for the rest of their lives. Over 4 years at the helm of a multinational conglomerate, Elaina had encountered every brand of insincere flattery and servile subservience. Yet, she had never met a group of people so effortlessly entitled to trample another human's dignity purely based on their perceived bank balance. Within these 4 thin apartment walls, however, she forced herself to swallow every sharp retort lingering on her tongue, shrinking inward to absorb their cruelty without resistance. All for the faint, warm memory of Ethan's initial kindness when they first crossed paths at the charity drive. She tucked away every biting rebuttal waiting on her lips, shrinking into herself to endure their unending stream of insults. Margaret, emboldened by the crowd's unified mockery, slammed her palm hard against the wooden couch armrest, producing a hollow thud that cut through the chatter. Her brows crumpled into a tight, furious knot as she fixed her unforgiving glare straight onto Elaina. Don't act like we're spouting lies. I fought tooth and nail to block this marriage from the very start. Ethan was blinded by your quiet little meek act, so wrapped up in fleeting infatuation, he couldn't see how little tangible value you bring to this household. She leaned forward across the narrow gap, separating them, her voice sharp and accusatory, every word hammered into Elena's chest like a rusted nail. Tell me plainly, what material benefit have you brought to this family in 2 full years? No high-paying corporate role, no wealthy relatives who can pull professional strings for Ethan's promotions, no extra cash to cover rent or auto loan payments. You sit around the apartment all day, living off my son's labor. The only thing you're capable of is boiling pasta and mopping linoleum. Hardly a marketable skill worthy of marrying a man with Ethan's steady, respectable career prospects. Elaina lifted her gaze slowly, her voice soft and unwavering, stripped of anger or self-pity, merely stating unarguable objective fact. I manage every household chore without asking Ethan to lift a finger after his 9-to-5 shifts. Every meal is hot and fresh before he walks through the door, every piece of laundry folded and put away, every birthday and holiday gift purchased entirely with my own hidden personal funds. I have never once asked Ethan to cover my personal costs, and I've consistently contributed to groceries and utility bills for as long as we've shared this space. Her statement was unvarnished truth, backed by 2 full years of consistent daily action, yet Margaret waved it off instantly as hollow, meaningless excuses. Housework is every wife's basic mandatory obligation. You think you deserve praise for doing what any normal woman would handle without complaint? Ethan married a partner to ease his financial burdens, not a deadbeat who contributes $0 to our monthly overhead. Look at that shirt you wear, worn thin at the cuffs, faded pale grey from hundreds of washing machine cycles. And look at those sad sacks of discount produce you haul home. nothing but the cheapest seasonal greens on the market. Your cheap, destitute energy infects this entire apartment and drags our whole family's social reputation down into the dirt. Each sentence sliced deeper into Elena's fragile sense of self-worth, weaponizing the humble, low-income lifestyle she'd deliberately adopted to test Ethan's genuine affection. The plain cotton top she wore had been selected specifically to blend seamlessly into the neighborhood housewife crowd. Every designer garment locked away in her climate-controlled Crestview Estates walk-in closet cost more than the Carter family's combined monthly household spending budget. She shopped for budget vegetables only to avoid drawing unwanted public attention to her immense wealth, yet every small compromise she made devolved into fresh ammunition for Margaret's endless stream of insults. Elaina did not believe modest living carried inherent shame. What truly disgusted her was the Carter matriarch's narrow-minded obsession with cold, hard cash as the sole universal measurement of human worth and moral character. Chloe jumped back into the conversation, her tone thick with bitter envy as she rambled about her college best friend's lavish, upper-middle-class lifestyle. Take my roommate from university for comparison. She married a tech company vice president. Her parents own multiple luxury townhomes downtown. Every holiday she brings designer leather handbags as gifts, drives a premium sports coupe everywhere she goes, and can effortlessly advance her husband's career through her family's extensive corporate connections. All Elaina can offer is silent floor scrubbing and lukewarm stews, utterly useless when it comes to building long-term financial security for a household. I warned him repeatedly not to rush into this marriage. Chloe tossed her hair with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Marriage is first and foremost a financial partnership, yet he threw all logical reasoning away chasing a meaningless crush. 2 years later, we're still stuck scraping paycheck to paycheck, all because he tied himself to someone with zero family financial resources to lean on in times of crisis. The surrounding relatives chimed in one after another, their overlapping murmurs filling the cramped living room with unrelenting negativity. Ethan's far too gentle for his own good, blinded by temporary romantic infatuation. A spouse without family financial backing is nothing but a decades-long burden. Young love fades fast when rent and auto loan invoices pile up. He'll regret this reckless choice for the rest of his life. No single person in that crowded room paused to acknowledge Elena's ceaseless daily sacrifices. No one spared a single kind thought for the nights she'd spent comforting Ethan after brutal work shifts, or the holidays she'd scrimped on her own personal spending to buy expensive skincare sets Margaret could never afford on her tight household budget. Elaina stood motionless amid the chorus of condemnation, her heart steadily cooling as the last faint flicker of hopeful warmth within her chest died out completely. She had clung stubbornly to the childish idea that consistent kindness could dissolve entrenched prejudice, yet 2 years of unceasing degradation had proven that people blinded by greed would never recognize selfless devotion without a 7-figure bank account to validate it. Her eyes drifted automatically toward the entryway, where Ethan had just returned from his office shift, his crisp, ironed button-down shirt still unwrinkled from his commute. She clung to one final, fragile shred of hope, waiting for the familiar defense he'd offered in their early months together. The quiet promise that he loved her regardless of wealth or social standing, that their simple, quiet life together was more than enough to fulfill him. In the first year of marriage, he had stepped bodily between her and Margaret's unkind tirades without hesitation, shielding her from every cruel remark with steady reassurance. Tonight, however, his brows were drawn tight with weary frustration, his jaw clamped shut, and there was no trace of compassion lingering in his dark brown eyes. All Elaina could read, plain on his face, was quiet, unspoken agreement with every harsh judgment his mother had hurled at her over the past hour. A cold, suffocating weight crashed down over Elena's ribcage the second she registered his silent complicity. Her heart plummeted into an icy abyss thousands of feet deep, the chill seeping into every vein until her fingertips turned numb. She finally understood the brutal truth she had spent 2 years willfully ignoring. Ethan's soft, gentle affection only existed within strict conditions. Those conditions required zero financial stress, zero family criticism, zero tension over perceived class gaps. The second real-world monetary pressure entered their lives, his fragile fondness for her would crumble instantly, and he would, without hesitation, side with his family, cast aside her endless sacrifices to prioritize their biased opinions. After a long, heavy pause, filled with the room's thick, hostile silence, Margaret's voice rose again, emboldened by her son's refusal to defend his wife. Her tone sharpened into an unnegotiable ultimatum directed straight at Elaina. "I'm going to lay this out plain, with no sugarcoating. Either you get a full-time salaried job tomorrow to chip in on rent and car payments, or you voluntarily step aside and stop ruining Ethan's bright future. My son is hard-working, good-looking, with a steady corporate schedule. Any wealthy heiress or well-off professional woman would jump at the chance to marry him. He's wasted 2 whole years tied down to you. If you possess even a shred of self-awareness, you'll walk away right now and stop dragging him down into lifelong struggle." Every syllable sliced through Elena's chest like a razor, completely shattering the last faint glimmer of hope she had clung to deep inside her heart. She drew a slow, shaky breath, her chest rising and falling as she forced down the flood of crushing sorrow and crushing disappointment bubbling up inside her. The soft warmth that had lingered in her gaze for 2 years vanished entirely, replaced by the cold, detached aloofness that came naturally to her as a multinational corporate executive used to negotiating hostile boardroom battles. She fixed her gaze across the room at Margaret's furious scowl, Chloe's sneering, petty face, and finally Ethan's silent, cowardly frame by the entryway, her voice light yet steady, laced with quiet, unshakable resolve. In all these 2 years of early mornings and late nights, scrubbing every surface and tending to every single one of your needs, does none of that hard labor count for anything at all to this family? Margaret let out a shrill, mocking cackle the instant Elaina finished speaking, her face contorted with unmasked disdain. Hard labor? Scrubbing floors and boiling vegetables doesn't count as meaningful contribution. It's every woman's basic chore. You've never brought home a salary, never pulled strings for this household, so you have absolutely nothing to boast about. You're nothing more than a freeloader surviving off my son's paycheck. If you're so convinced you're wronged, then tell us, what actual value do you even hold? Value. The single word echoed hollowly inside Elena's skull, a cold, rigid measuring stick being used to weigh 2 years of unselfish love and sacrifice, the whole spectacle absurd beyond belief. A faint, icy half-smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she silently repeated the word to herself. If she chose to shed her fabricated poor girl disguise for even 10 seconds, every single person crammed into this tiny living room would never again qualify to hold a single civil conversation with her on equal footing. Hale Global Holdings spanned real estate, international trade, digital media, and luxury hospitality, controlling nearly 70% of the city's high-end commercial real estate portfolio. A single offhand comment from her office could tank dozens of local businesses or launch them into overnight prosperity. One casual, small-scale investment from her personal fund held enough capital to purchase this entire aging apartment complex outright, covering every single dollar the Carter family would ever earn across 3 generations of combined labor. Yet for the sake of a fleeting, naive hope in unconditional love, She had locked all that power and wealth away, willingly lowering herself to the level of a scorned working-class housewife who scrubbed pots for the family's dinner table. All she had received in exchange was universal dismissal, labelled a worthless, burdensome nobody with nothing to offer anyone. The absurdity of her own naivety made her chest ache with hollow sorrow. Amid the room's continued snickering and mocking chatter, Ethan finally broke his long silence. He strode forward quickly, his hand reaching out to wrap loosely around Elena's cold wrist, his brow furrowed with exhausted frustration, his tone laced with thinly veiled blame beneath a veneer of gentle persuasion. "Stop arguing back with Mum. She's only looking out for our shared future. Rent payments and auto loans keep climbing higher every month. The pressure on both of us is overwhelming. You really ought to find steady work to lighten the load I'm carrying alone." That single lightweight sentence carried enough weight to crush every remaining fragment of love Elaina had held for him. A raw, jagged tear opened inside her chest, cold wind howling through the wound, the pain so sharp it made her vision blur for a split second. All those soft, sweet memories of their early courtship revealed themselves as hollow pretense. His affection had always come with invisible fine print. He saw her endless self-sacrifice, yet chose to ignore it the second his family voiced disapproval, automatically siding with their prejudice and demanding she compromise even further to satisfy their narrow monetary standards. Never once in 2 years had he stepped forward to shield her from their endless cruelty, to validate the hundreds of small, quiet sacrifices she made every single day for his comfort. Elaina pulled her wrist free from his loose grasp, slowly and gently. No struggle, no outburst, only quiet, irreversible distance settling between their bodies. "Fine," she said, her voice flat, stripped of all emotion, heavy with the quiet peace of a person who had finally let go of every impossible dream. "I won't be a burden to you any longer." Ethan blinked in faint surprise, misinterpreting her calm resignation as childish tantrum fueled by hurt feelings. He frowned, offering shallow, dismissive comfort. "I'm not angry with you. I just want us to build a more stable life together. Don't overthink this small argument." Elaina leaned her head lightly against his upper arm, breathing in the faint cedar cologne clinging to his wool coat. Inside the sunroom, a crackling stone fireplace cast soft amber light over rows of leather-bound philanthropic reports and framed photos. One captured her standing at a rural youth entrepreneurship forum, surrounded by grinning small business owners. Another showed her and Sebastian posing with scholarship students on a college campus. None of the frames held a single memory tied to Maplewood, Ethan, or the suffocating small apartment that had once felt like a prison. The old wounds hadn't vanished entirely, but they'd faded into faint scars, no longer capable of reopening to bleed. A soft chime sounded from her private cell phone resting on the stone windowsill. Nina sending over a brief, unobtrusive update about Hale Global's quarterly sustainable development project. Elaina glanced at the screen, skimmed the text quickly, and set the device face down without rushing to respond. Back during her marriage to Ethan, every work call, every corporate emergency had been hidden away, silenced and buried, so she would not be accused of prioritizing money over household duties. Now, her career was hers to nurture freely, balanced alongside quiet domestic joy, with a partner who never asked her to choose between her empire and their shared life. "Want to head inside and sort through the scholarship applicant profiles after we finish watching the volunteers?" Sebastian asked, tilting his head toward the oak study tucked at the back of the manor's west wing. "We've got nearly 300 new submissions this winter term. I thought we could pick out the final candidates together over hot cocoa and shortbread." Elaina nodded, a warm, genuine light lighting up her eyes. the kind of brightness she'd never once worn within the Carter home, a glow unclouded by fear of judgment or endless quiet suffering. I'd love that. There's something far more fulfilling about investing in kids who need a chance than chasing empty corporate galas full of people who only want to network for profit. As they turned to step back into the sunroom's warmth, Nina's second message pinged through the phone, a brief, neutral heads-up about a trivial sighting she'd documented while running errands downtown that afternoon. Ms. Hale, just an FYI. I passed Ethan outside a discount grocery store on Main Street. He was buying expired canned goods, alone, looked gaunt and exhausted. Margaret was with him, arguing loudly about medical bills they can't afford. No need to acknowledge or engage, just thought I'd relay it per protocol. Elena's gaze flicked across the screen for barely a second before she flipped the phone fully over, blocking the notification from sight. No flicker of hatred, no surge of triumphant satisfaction stirred in her chest, only a quiet, distant pity, soft and unburdensome. She did not hate them anymore, but she would never open the door to reintroduce their chaos into her peaceful present. They had made every choice that led to their endless regret, and that weight was theirs alone to carry for the rest of their lives. Sebastian caught the faint shift in her expression, yet he did not press her for details, only laced his fingers gently through hers, squeezing once in silent comfort. We don't owe them a single thought, love. Our world's too full of good things to waste energy on people who chose cruelty over kindness. Elaina squeezed his hand back, the cold winter wind swirling around the balcony rail, fading into nothing against the warmth of his palm. You're right. What's waiting inside matters far more than ghosts from a life I left behind years ago. They stepped through the glass sliding door together, shutting out the faint snowfall and any lingering echoes of the past, the heavy glass barrier sealing off the faint, distant memory of Maplewood's cracked stairwells and shrill household arguments. Inside the manor, the air hummed with gentle piano music from the grand baby grand tucked in the corner, the scent of vanilla shortbread wafting from the kitchen, and stacks of hopeful scholarship applications waiting to be read. All the bright, unburdened future she had built for herself, alongside the only person who had ever loved her without demanding she shrink small to fit his family's narrow standards. The next dawn broke with faint pale golden light seeping through the apartment's cracked windows, spilling across Elena's quiet, unblemished profile as she sat on the edge of the mattress. She had remained awake all night, yet no trace of exhaustion marked her features, only a profound, weightless sense of relief that she had never felt in 2 full years of forced compromise. No tangled regret, no lingering longing, only the quiet freedom of finally letting go of a love that had only ever wounded her. The two of them arrived at the Municipal Civil Affairs Office promptly at opening time to file divorce paperwork. The second Ethan's pen hovered over the signature line, his fingers faltered, a faint, hollow sorrow stirring inside his chest. 2 years of quiet domestic warmth lingered as faint memories in his mind, yet he still clung to his arrogant assumption that Elaina would collapse without his financial support, bound to return to him in desperate regret within months. He leaned toward her across the table, his voice dripping with misplaced magnanimous pity. If you ever struggle out there and regret this choice, the door's always open for you. I don't think you can survive alone without me to provide for you. Elaina glanced at him briefly, a flicker of quiet sorrow stirring inside her for his blind ignorance, yet she offered no rebuttal. She signed her name in neat, fluid cursive, stood and walked straight out of the government building without a single backward glance. The crisp morning wind swept across her cheeks as she stepped onto the sidewalk, clearing 2 full years of built-up tension and quiet grief from her shoulders. She reached up to slide the cheap plastic band Ethan had bought her at a street vendor stall off her wrist, the trivial trinket that had once represented all her fragile hopes for pure, unmonetary love. She tossed it into a public trash can on the sidewalk without a second glance, severing every last symbolic tie to that fabricated life of poverty and compromise. At that exact moment, the elaborate disguise she had maintained for 24 months crumbled entirely. Her cell phone buzzed sharply in her pocket, a call from Nina Reed, her loyal personal executive assistant, flashing across the screen. The second Elaina accepted the call, her entire demeanor shifted instantaneously. No more soft, muted timidity, no hunched shoulders or downcast eyes. Her voice turned crisp, icy, and authoritative, carrying the unshakable command of a CEO who oversaw thousands of employees across dozens of corporate branches. Nina, call an emergency all-hands executive meeting immediately to reinstate all my suspended travel and project schedules. Have the staff fully prepare Crestview Estates Unit 8 for my permanent residence effective today. Terminate all low-profile public concealment protocols. I'm returning to full executive duties starting this morning. The relief was palpable in Nina's voice over the line, warm with genuine elation after 2 long years of waiting for her boss's return to the corporate fold. Yes, Ms. Hale, I'll alert every department head within 5 minutes. All delayed development and international partnership projects have been prepped and waiting for your approval the entire time. Every single team member has been counting down the days until you're back at headquarters. For 2 full years, every high-level executive and thousands of rank-and-file staff at Hale Global Holdings had waited patiently for their young, brilliant leader to emerge from self-imposed seclusion. None of them could wrap their minds around why a woman who controlled billions in assets would voluntarily lock herself away in a run-down low-rise apartment, scrubbing dishes and haggling over grocery prices like a destitute housewife. Now, the long waiting was over. The legend of Hale Global's founding heir was returning to reclaim her empire. Less than 20 minutes after the call ended, a fully customized black luxury sedan pulled smoothly to the curb beside the sidewalk where Elaina stood. The uniformed professional chauffeur exited the vehicle, bending into a deep, respectful bow as he opened the rear passenger door wide. Ms. Hale, your vehicle is ready. Elaina nodded once in silent acknowledgement, straightening her posture fully as she slipped into the car's spacious back seat. The heavy tinted door closed behind her with a soft, muted thud, sealing off the noisy, worn neighborhood sidewalk and the 2 miserable years of mistreatment she had endured within Maplewood Apartments. The car's interior maintained a perfect constant temperature, filled with a subtle, expensive sandalwood fragrance. Every surface was lined with custom soft leather and polished rare hardwood detailing. Elaina leaned back against the plush seat cushions, closing her eyes for a brief moment as every painful memory of those 2 years flickered across her mind's eye. Every frigid winter morning she'd woken at 5 a.m. to prepare hot breakfast before Ethan left for work. Every night she'd folded piles of laundry alone while the family mocked her behind closed doors. Every time she'd swallowed harsh insults to preserve the fragile peace of their household, every vain hope she'd clung to that Carters might one day recognize her quiet devotion. A faint, gentle sadness stirred inside her, yet it carried no trace of lingering heartbreak. She had once chosen to lower herself for love, but blind naivety had taught her a brutal lesson, and now the chapter was permanently closed. The sedan glided smoothly away from the aging residential district, heading steadily uphill toward Crestview Estates, the exclusive gated hilltop enclave reserved solely for the city's wealthiest elite. This neighborhood was shielded by 24-hour armed security, lined with sprawling single-family villas, surrounded by manicured private gardens, every property worth millions of dollars, an existence the Carter family could never attain, even if they labored non-stop for 10 consecutive lifetimes. As Elaina watched the opulent villas slide past the car's window, a quiet calm settled deep within her chest. This was the life she had built for herself through years of relentless hard work and sharp business acumen, the life she had voluntarily abandoned in pursuit of a hollow dream of unconditional love, untainted by money. Free of the family's endless prejudice and ungrateful demands, she could finally step back into the life she had earned by her own merit. Meanwhile, back at the cramped Maplewood apartment, the Carter household descended rapidly into unending chaos and crippling regret. The second Elaina walked out the door. At first, Margaret wallowed in unbridled joy, parading around the neighborhood to brag to every neighbor that she'd finally rid her son of his penniless burden. Chloe wasted no time compiling a long list of supposedly wealthy single women she intended to set Ethan up with, convinced he would land a high-net-worth bride and lift the entire family out of financial struggle within months. Reality struck them hard and fast, delivering a brutal, unforgiving wake-up call. Chloe arranged more than a dozen blind dates for Ethan over the span of a single month, every single one ending in immediate rejection. Truly well-educated, financially independent young women took one look at Ethan's timid demeanor, modest entry-level office salary, and overbearing mother before cutting all contact instantly. The gold-digging socialites Chloe pushed toward Ethan all made outrageous demands on the first date: fully paid luxury homes, six-figure engagement jewelry, complete exemption from housework and elder care, zero willingness to compromise on any lifestyle comfort. After dozens of crushing rejections, Ethan's self-confidence shattered completely, sinking him into a state of unrelenting depression. It was only then that he began to truly register everything Elaina had silently provided for him over 2 years: uncomplaining domestic labor, consistent quiet emotional support, zero material greed, endless patience with his family's vicious verbal attacks. He realized how irreplaceable her gentle, steady presence had been in his daily life, yet the realization came far too late to salvage anything between them. The household's collapse hit even harder without Elena's constant caretaking. When Elaina lived there, the apartment had always been spotlessly clean, hot, balanced meals, waiting every evening, all clothing washed, folded, and ironed without a single word of complaint. Now, there was no one to rise early to cook breakfast, no one to scrub countertops or mop floors, no one to organize piles of clutter. Ethan left the house before dawn and returned well after dark each night, completely incapable of tending to the mountain of household chores. Margaret had grown fully accustomed to being waited on hand and foot for 2 years. Her joints ached constantly after years of minimal physical labor, and tackling laundry, dishes, and daily cooking left her sore and exhausted by midday. Within 2 weeks, the once tidy apartment devolved into a filthy, disorganized mess. Coffee mugs stacked high on every surface, piles of unwashed laundry heaped across the sofa, grease caked thick over every kitchen countertop, a stale, unpleasant odor lingering in every room. Meals devolved into cold, leftover takeout or microwave frozen dinners, no more carefully seasoned home cooking waiting for them at the end of long days. Every small comfort they had taken for granted vanished overnight, and Margaret's temper frayed to the breaking point. She wandered the messy, empty apartment day after day, heavy, hollow regret weighing down her chest as she replayed every cruel insult she'd hurled at Elaina over the past 2 years. It slowly dawned on her that the woman she'd spent every opportunity mocking as a useless burden had been the invisible backbone holding their entire fragile household together. But the realization arrived far too late. Elaina had walked away without a single glance backward, never to return. While the Carters drowned in self-inflicted domestic chaos, Elaina reclaimed her position as Hale Global Holdings' undisputed leader, sending shockwaves rippling across the entire regional business industry. With her full return to corporate operations, every suspended project kicked into high gear. She orchestrated landmark cross-border trade partnerships, broke ground on 3 premium mixed-use real estate developments in the city's central business district, and expanded the company's digital media division to national audience reach. Every strategic choice she made delivered exponential profit growth. The group's market value surged by billions of dollars within just 30 days, cementing its spot as the region's #1 privately owned conglomerate. Gone were the faded cotton tees and discount grocery runs. Elena's public appearances were now headline events across every local business magazine and high society publication. Custom couture gowns, subtle luxury jewelry, and a team of dedicated professional stylists accompanied her to every summit, charity gala, and industry keynote speech. Her posture held quiet, unshakable authority, every gesture radiating the quiet confidence of a self-made multi-billionaire. Every elite businessman, investor, and socialite clamored for a moment of her time, desperate to secure partnership opportunities or earn her favor. Countless wealthy, accomplished suitors lined up to court her, yet she paid no mind to empty performative admiration, fully focused on expanding her company's philanthropic initiatives and long-term development plans. No longer trapped within a cramped apartment, surrounded by endless judgment, she resided in her sprawling Crestview villa, traveled via private luxury vehicle, and governed a multinational empire with effortless poise, free of petty domestic conflict and ungrateful family criticism. The definitive turning point, the moment the entire Carter family learned the full truth of Elena's identity, arrived at the city's annual Business Leaders Gala, the most exclusive invitation-only event of the year, reserved solely for billion-dollar enterprise owners, top-tier investment bankers, and municipal political officials. Ordinary mid-level office workers like Ethan had no legitimate way to secure entry tickets. His employer scraped together 2 hard-won guest passes, hoping Ethan might network with high-value executives to secure a critical company collaboration deal. Overjoyed at the rare opportunity, Ethan purchased his single most expensive tailored suit, spending hours styling his hair and practicing polished conversation starters, convinced this event would be his ticket to financial advancement. Margaret urged him repeatedly to ingratiate himself to every wealthy attendee, aiming for him to meet a rich single woman who could fix all their household's money struggles. The gala venue at Azure Grand Hotel glittered with thousands of crystal chandeliers. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the downtown skyline, tables laid out with fine silverware and crystal wine glasses. Guests, dressed in designer formal wear, mingling with soft orchestral music, floating through the air. Ethan followed his boss closely, shoulders hunched with nervous inferiority, staring in quiet awe at every attendee surrounding him. People whose net worth dwarfed anything he could ever hope to accumulate over an entire lifetime. He lingered at the edge of the crowd, too intimidated to strike up conversation with any high-powered executive. Without warning, every overhead light in the ballroom shifted, converging on the main entrance at the far end of the hall. The soft orchestral melody swelled to a richer crescendo, every guest automatically falling silent, all heads turning in unison toward the doorway. The dense crowd parted naturally, forming a wide, empty central aisle to clear a path for the guest of honor. Elaina stepped slowly into the spotlight, every movement graceful and unhurried. She wore a minimalist black couture floor-length gown that accentuated her tall, slender frame, her raven hair twisted into an elegant low chignon, exposing the smooth curve of her neck and delicate collarbones. Her makeup, soft yet refined, her eyes cool and self-assured, an aura of quiet, unassailable power wrapping around her like an invisible cloak. Every multi-millionaire and corporate CEO lining the aisle bowed their heads in deference, stepping forward to greet her with reverent tones. "Ms. Hale, it's an honor to have you with us tonight. Hale Global's visionary leader, we've long anticipated your attendance." Ethan's blood ran cold the second his eyes locked onto her face. His feet rooted to the marble floor, his breath catching violently in his throat, his mind short-circuiting entirely as he struggled to process the impossible sight standing 100 feet away from him. The woman who had scrubbed their pots, endured his mother's endless jeers, and been labelled penniless trash by his entire family, was the most celebrated, revered business icon in the entire city. The gap between their social standings was immeasurable, a chasm the Carters could never cross. He watched her glide up to the stage, accept the microphone, and deliver a keynote address that balanced sharp business insight with generous focus on local community economic revitalization. Every word she spoke carried quiet gravitas, drawing thunderous, sustained applause from hundreds of elite attendees. Ethan's supervisor standing beside him whispered in quiet awe, barely containing his admiration. "That's Elaina Hale, youngest self-made multi-billionaire in the state. Every corporation in this region begs to form partnerships with Hale Global. Marrying her would set any man up for life, no need to work a single day ever again." Each word landed like a jagged blade stabbing Ethan's chest, waves of crushing shame and all-consuming regret crashing over him in thick, suffocating waves. He finally grasped the full scope of his family's catastrophic mistake. She had not been destitute and useless. She had stripped away billions in assets, discarded her elite social circle, and voluntarily shrank herself down to fit into his humble life, all out of a sincere, desperate desire to experience love untethered to wealth. Her quiet devotion had been dismissed as worthless poverty, while his family's shallow greed and narrow-minded prejudice had tossed an irreplaceable treasure straight out their front door. Midway through the gala's reception hour, Ethan pushed through groups of wealthy guests without regard for social etiquette, stumbling forward until he stood directly in front of Elena's small circle of industry leaders. The executives around her stepped back politely to grant them space, curious about the frantic-looking young man disrupting their conversation. Elaina turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over his disheveled, red-rimmed eyes without a flicker of surprise or emotion, only distant neutrality, as if observing a complete stranger she had never crossed paths with before. "Elaina, it's really you." Ethan's voice cracked with unbridled panic and crushing remorse, his entire frame trembling under the weight of dawning horror. Elaina gave one quiet, unemotional nod. "It is." That single syllable felt like a cold stone dropped into Ethan's chest. Tears welled up instantly in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks as he stumbled through fragmented, desperate apologies. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea who you were. I was blind, spineless, let my mother and sister bully you non-stop while I stayed silent. I threw away the best thing that ever walked into my life, and I hate myself for it more than anything." Elaina listened to his tearful breakdown without the slightest flicker of pity or lingering affection. "I chose to hide my identity voluntarily, searching for love that valued only me, not my fortune. That was my error in judgment. But your entire family chose cruelty and judgment based solely on what they thought was my lack of money. You stood by and let them break my heart without a single word of defense. Every consequence of that choice belongs solely to your household." Ethan dropped his head, hands shaking as he begged for a second chance. "Let's fix this. Let's remarry. I'll protect you from every harsh word from my family. I'll cherish you properly this time. Come back home with me." A faint, bitter smile tugged at Elena's lips at the word home. That cramped, hostile apartment, filled with constant cruelty, had never been a home, merely a self-imposed prison she had escaped from long ago. "There's no going back, Ethan. When I had nothing but my heart to give, your family tossed me aside like garbage. Now I hold everything I could ever need for a fulfilling life. I have zero reason to revisit that pain. A person only gets one genuine, unselfish love to offer. I gave mine to your family, and it was completely destroyed. We part ways permanently tonight." She turned away from him without another glance, walking back toward her circle of respected business partners, leaving Ethan standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, drowning in public humiliation and endless, unending regret. He watched her upright, unwavering, retreating figure until she vanished into the crowd, knowing he would never have another chance to speak to her again. After the gala ended, Ethan stumbled home in a daze and broke the full truth to his parents and sister that night. The second the words left his mouth, a metal frying pan slipped from Margaret's grasp, clattering loudly onto the tile kitchen floor. Her knees buckled instantly, collapsing her onto the cold, hard ground, her face draining of all color as violent tremors racked her entire body. Chloe's smartphone slipped out of her hands and crashed onto the sofa cushions. Every bit of her habitual vanity and sharp-tongued arrogance evaporated in an instant, replaced by overwhelming, crippling shame as she replayed every cruel joke she'd directed at Elaina over the years. Robert sat frozen in a dining room chair, his weathered eyes blank with quiet guilt, realizing his constant silent complicity in his wife and daughter's relentless mistreatment of the young woman who'd single-handedly maintained their household comfort. They pulled up every business news article and high society photograph featuring Elaina Hale on their phones, staring in stunned silence at the woman they'd spent 2 years relentlessly mocking and degrading. Margaret collapsed into racking, hysterical sobs, clutching her face as every memory of her own vicious insults flooded her mind. "I was blind, stupid, greedy beyond belief. Such a kind, hard-working girl who never asked for anything from us, and I tore her down every single day just because I thought she had no money. We were the ones climbing far above our station, and I threw away our greatest blessing with my own 2 hands." She scrambled to gather the nicest gifts they owned, determined to drive to Crestview Estates and beg for forgiveness, hoping to somehow mend the irreparable rift between them. Yet when they arrived at the gated villa community's main security checkpoint, uniformed guards refused them entry outright. No pre-approved visitor clearance meant they could not step foot inside the exclusive neighborhood, no matter how desperately Margaret cried and pleaded at the gatehouse. Standing outside the towering iron security gates, staring at the distant glowing villa lights, hidden behind lush private trees, Margaret finally understood the permanent, insurmountable divide that separated them from Elaina. They would never again earn the right to speak to her face to face. For months afterward, Ethan lingered outside Hale Global's corporate high-rise every single day, waiting for Elena's vehicle to exit the parking garage, each time attempting to beg for a 5-minute conversation. Nina always intercepted him politely, yet firmly, passing along Elena's clear instruction that she had no desire to ever interact with the Carter family again. Each failed waiting session chipped away at Ethan's remaining hope, dragging him deeper into spiraling depression. His work performance plummeted, resulting in a demotion and steep pay cut. The household mortgage payments grew nearly impossible to cover. The small apartment stayed perpetually messy and cold, Margaret suffering chronic insomnia and stress-induced heart palpitations from unceasing remorse, forced to take daily medication to calm her frayed nerves. Chloe abandoned all her shallow social media obsessions, taking a low-wage clerical job to help cover household expenses, never again daring to pass judgment on anyone's financial background after the crushing humiliation she'd endured. Every single member of the Carter household lived trapped in self-inflicted torment, paying the endless price for their own short-sighted, money-obsessed prejudice. Far removed from their self-made suffering, Elena's life bloomed into complete, unshakable fulfillment. A year following the divorce, she attended a cross-industry charity summit where she met Sebastian Vaughan, founder of the country's top independent investment bank. Sebastian's keynote speech struck a perfect chord with Elena's own core values. He judged people purely by their character and integrity, never their bank account or family status. During the gala dinner following the summit, they sat side by side and talked for hours about corporate ethics, community philanthropy, and personal life experiences. He had heard the rumors of her 2 years living incognito in a working-class apartment, yet he expressed no morbid curiosity or greedy desire to leverage her business connections, only sincere admiration for her quiet willingness to test love without wealth attached. He respected her autonomy, celebrated her achievements, and cherished her gentle, compassionate core, far more than her multi-billion-dollar corporate portfolio. A slow, genuine romance blossomed between them, built entirely on mutual understanding and equal respect. No transactional motives clouding their bond. Sebastian remembered her favorite teas, stayed late to accompany her through marathon corporate strategy sessions, offered calm, balanced guidance during hostile business takeover battles, yet never attempted to control or restrict her freedom in any capacity. Elena's heart, long sealed off after the trauma of her previous marriage, slowly softened once more, allowing herself to open up to a love that valued her wholly, without condition. Exactly 1 year after they first met, Sebastian hosted a private proposal dinner at Twilight Manor, his sprawling private countryside estate. Thousands of glowing fairy lights draped across the sprawling lawn, fresh seasonal flowers arranged in winding garden paths. He knelt on one knee beneath a sky full of faint stars, holding a simple, understated diamond ring, his voice soft and sincere as he spoke. "I don't love the Hale global empire you command. I love Elaina, the woman who once gave up everything to seek pure love, who remains endlessly kind and compassionate despite the cruelty she's endured. For all the rest of our days, I will never let you bear a single ounce of pain or ungrateful judgment again. I'll stand beside you as your equal partner through every triumph and quiet ordinary moment alike." Elena's eyes glistened with gentle, genuine joy as she nodded her consent, accepting his proposal without hesitation. 6 months later, they held an intimate, low-key wedding ceremony at Twilight Manor, attended solely by close personal friends and trusted industry colleagues. No flashy, ostentatious displays of wealth, only quiet warmth and heartfelt well wishes. After marriage, Elaina continued to lead Hale Global to new heights of success, while she and Sebastian partnered to launch multiple charitable foundations focused on funding rural startup entrepreneurs and providing full-ride scholarships for disadvantaged young students. In her spare time, they traveled the world together, exploring mountain landscapes and coastal villages side by side, finding peace in quiet companionship built on genuine spiritual alignment. Occasionally, old business acquaintances would relay news of the Carter family's ongoing misery to Elena's ears. Margaret, crippled by constant regret and chronic poor health, Ethan living alone in perpetual melancholy, Chloe humbled and stripped of all her former vanity. When she heard these updates, Elaina felt no rush of vindictive satisfaction, only quiet, distant release. She had no obligation to forgive the harm they had inflicted upon her, yet she had fully let go of all lingering resentment. Narrow-minded people would remain trapped within their own created regret, while those brave enough to walk away from pain deserved the freedom to chase a bright, unburdened future. Once, she had stripped away all her power and fortune to chase a hollow fantasy of unconditional love, only to be met with greed and contempt. Now, she stood firmly in the fullness of her own success, having found a partner who loved every part of her without measuring her worth in dollars. The truest form of life's happy ending was never watching those who hurt you drown in regret. It was breaking free from stifling judgment, growing into the person you were always meant to be, and meeting someone who treasures every piece of your soul without ever asking you to shrink yourself small for their comfort. The road ahead stretched endless and bright for Elaina, lined with career success, quiet joy, and a love that cost her nothing of herself to sustain. #continuation. The first crisp snow of December dusted the manicured lawns of Twilight Manor, soft white flakes drifting down to settle atop evergreen hedges strung with warm golden fairy lights. Elaina and Sebastian stood side by side on the glass sunroom's wide marble balcony, mugs of spiced warm cider curled in their palms, watching a team of volunteer teens lay out care packages for rural scholarship recipients on the lawn below. This was the annual winter charity drive they co-founded 6 months after their wedding, a project born from Elena's old quiet wish. Back when she'd lived, confined to Maplewood apartments, she'd dreamed of having the means to lift struggling young people out of financial anxiety, just as no one had ever lifted her when she was deliberately playing the role of a penniless housewife. Sebastian's shoulder brushed gently against hers, his voice soft, laced with quiet fondness as he followed her gaze toward the laughing group of volunteers. "You've always carried this quiet generosity in you, haven't you? Even back when you buried your identity and scrubbed someone else's kitchen floors every night, you'd slip cash into envelopes for the elderly neighbor down your apartment hall, remember?" Elena's fingers tightened faintly around the ceramic mug, a faint, bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. She rarely spoke of the 2 years trapped in the Carter household these days, but with Sebastian, every unhealed crevice of her past felt safe to unpack, free of the shame she'd once carried. "I thought back then that small, hidden kindness might be enough to balance out the bitterness swallowing me whole. I kept hoping if I gave quietly, without demanding recognition, the Carters might soften their hearts a little. Turns out, people blinded by money can't see goodness even when it's laid out right in front of them." She paused, watching a teenage girl tuck a thick wool scarf into a cardboard care box and let the weight of old sorrow slide off her shoulders. "I don't regret those years entirely, though. That life taught me to separate a person's value from their bank balance far clearer than any boardroom negotiation ever could. If I'd never hidden behind that cheap cotton wardrobe and those discount grocery sacks, I might have grown just as cold and judgmental as Margaret and Chloe, measuring every stranger by the car they drove or the house they owned." Sebastian lifted a hand to brush a stray snowflake from her cheek, his touch tender and steady, never overbearing, always giving her space to breathe. "Your compassion isn't conditional on how others treat you. That's what sets you apart from every person who's ever only chased wealth for status. Most billionaires hoard their power to look down on others. You built foundations to lift people up beside you." Elaina leaned her head lightly against his upper arm, breathing in the faint cedar cologne clinging to his wool coat. Inside the sunroom, a crackling stone fireplace cast soft amber light over rows of leather-bound philanthropic reports and framed photos. One captured her standing at a rural youth entrepreneurship forum, surrounded by grinning small business owners. Another showed her and Sebastian posing with scholarship students on a college campus. None of the frames held a single memory tied to Maplewood, Ethan, or the suffocating small apartment that had once felt like a prison. The old wounds hadn't vanished entirely, but they'd faded into faint scars, no longer capable of reopening to bleed. A soft chime sounded from her private cell phone, resting on the stone windowsill. Nina, sending over a brief, unobtrusive update about Hale Global's quarterly sustainable development project. Elaina glanced at the screen, skimmed the text quickly, and set the device face down without rushing to respond. Back during her marriage to Ethan, every work call, every corporate emergency had been hidden away, silenced and buried, so she would not be accused of prioritizing money over household duties. Now, her career was hers to nurture freely, balanced alongside quiet domestic joy, with a partner who never asked her to choose between her empire and their shared life. Want to head inside and sort through the scholarship applicant profiles after we finish watching the volunteers? Sebastian asked, tilting his head toward the oak study, tucked at the back of the manor's west wing. We've got nearly 300 new submissions this winter term. I thought we could pick out the final candidates together over hot cocoa and shortbread. Elaina nodded, a warm, genuine light lighting up her eyes. The kind of brightness she'd never once worn within the Carter home, a glow unclouded by fear of judgment or endless quiet suffering. I'd love that. There's something far more fulfilling about investing in kids who need a chance than chasing empty corporate galas full of people who only want to network for profit. As they turned to step back into the sunroom's warmth, Nina's second message pinged through the phone. A brief, neutral heads-up about a trivial sighting she'd documented while running errands downtown that afternoon. Ms. Hale, just an FYI, I passed Ethan outside a discount grocery store on Main Street. He was buying expired canned goods, alone, looked gaunt and exhausted. Margaret was with him, arguing loudly about medical bills they can't afford. No need to acknowledge or engage, just thought I'd relay it per protocol. Elena's gaze flicked across the screen for barely a second before she flipped the phone fully over, blocking the notification from sight. No flicker of hatred, no surge of triumphant satisfaction stirred in her chest. Only a quiet, distant pity, soft and unburdensome. She did not hate them anymore, but she would never open the door to reintroduce their chaos into her peaceful present. They had made every choice that led to their endless regret, and that weight was theirs alone to carry for the rest of their lives. Sebastian caught the faint shift in her expression, yet he did not press her for details, only laced his fingers gently through hers, squeezing once in silent comfort. We don't owe them a single thought, love. Our world's too full of good things to waste energy on people who chose cruelty over kindness. Elaina squeezed his hand back, the cold winter wind swirling around the balcony rail, fading into nothing against the warmth of his palm. You're right. What's waiting inside matters far more than ghosts from a life I left behind years ago. They stepped through the glass sliding door together, shutting out the faint snowfall and any lingering echoes of the past, the heavy glass barrier sealing off the faint distant memory of Maplewood's cracked stairwells and shrill household arguments. Inside the manor, the air hummed with gentle piano music from the grand baby grand tucked in the corner, the scent of vanilla shortbread wafting from the kitchen, and stacks of hopeful scholarship applications waiting to be read. All the bright, unburdened future she had built for herself, alongside the only person who had ever loved her without demanding she shrink small to fit his family's narrow standards. Down on the snow-dusted Main Street, miles away, Ethan hauled a crumpled paper bag of discounted canned beans toward the beat-up old sedan he'd owned for 7 years. Margaret trundled beside him, her shoulders hunched against the biting December wind, her voice raw and scratchy from endless sleepless nights filled with regret. I still lie awake every night, thinking of how she'd make us homemade stews, fresh bread every Sunday, fold every piece of laundry without a word. I called her ungrateful trash for nothing, all because I thought she had no money to throw around for fancy gifts. If I'd just been kinder back then. Ethan stared blankly at the icy asphalt beneath his scuffed sneakers, his throat tight and aching. He'd driven past Crestview Estate's gated entrance dozens of times over the past year, always turned away by security, never once catching a glimpse of Elena's car or her silhouette through the villa windows. He'd sent dozens of long, apologetic text messages to a number that had long since been disconnected, mailed handwritten letters that all came back, marked, "Return to sender." Every attempt to reach her hit an unbreakable wall, proof that the door he and his family had slammed shut 2 years prior would never creak open again. "Mum, it's no use rehashing this," he mumbled, his voice hollow and drained. "We threw away the only good thing we ever had, and there's no way to take it back. She's living a life we can't even begin to touch, with someone who actually values who she is, not what she owns. We're stuck picking through expired groceries and fighting over medical co-pays because we judged her based on a fake poor girl disguise we forced her to wear for us." A few storefronts down, Chloe emerged from a tiny neighborhood office supply shop, clutching a thin stack of cheap copy paper for her low-wage clerical job. Her once bright, flashy wardrobe had long been traded for muted, thrifted coats. Her social media feeds emptied of all the wealthy friend comparison posts she'd once posted non-stop. She paused beside her mother and brother, staring at the frozen sidewalk, her cheeks burning with permanent shame every time she recalled the cruel jokes she'd cracked about Elena's cheap clothes and worthless domestic labor at those old family dinner parties. "I ran into one of our old relatives at the laundromat yesterday," Chloe spoke quietly, her tone devoid of the sharp, snarky bite that had once defined her personality. "They were talking about Elena's charity foundation, how she's funding hundreds of kids' college tuition. I stood there listening, and all I could think about was how I spent every chance I got mocking her for having nothing. I was so blind, so awful back then. I don't think I'll ever fully forgive myself for the way I treated her." Robert, who'd lingered in the car waiting for them, rolled down the window, his grey hair fluttering in the cold wind. He'd spent countless quiet evenings alone at the apartment kitchen table, replaying every time he'd stayed silent while his wife and daughter tore Elaina down, never speaking a single word in her defense. His guilt weighed slow and heavy, a constant quiet burden he carried with no avenue to make amends. "We all failed that girl. We took her quiet devotion for granted, measured her worth only in dollars, and tossed her out like broken trash when she couldn't supply us with wealth. No amount of regret will fix the damage we did." The four of them climbed silently into the drafty sedan, the heater sputtering weak, lukewarm air. As Ethan pulled away from the curb, none of them noticed the distant glow of Twilight Manor's fairy lights far atop the city's hills, a world of warmth, purpose, and reciprocal love they would never have the right to step foot in again. Their winter would stretch long, cold, and filled with endless looping what-ifs. Far up on the hill, Elena's winter hummed with hope, giving, and a love that required no sacrifice of her soul. Months later, spring unfurled soft green leaves across the hills surrounding Twilight Manor. Elaina and Sebastian hosted a weekend retreat for their scholarship recipients on the estate grounds, filling the sprawling gardens with young laughter, picnic blankets, and tables stacked with refreshments. She wandered between groups of teens, kneeling to listen intently as they shared their business plans and academic dreams. No trace of the quiet, shrinking woman she'd once been within the Carter household. Sebastian leaned against a garden stone fountain, watching her with unwavering soft fondness. Nina wandered over to stand beside him, offering a light update on the group's housing accommodations for the retreat weekend. "All the guest cottages are fully prepped. The caterers will arrive by noon tomorrow. The Rural Entrepreneurship Panel is scheduled for Sunday morning. All local industry leaders confirmed their attendance." Sebastian nodded, his gaze never leaving Elena's frame as she laughed alongside a teen girl designing an organic farm startup. She built every bit of this good from scratch, all after walking away from people who saw nothing but a poor burden in her. It still astounds me how she never let bitterness harden her heart, even after everything she endured." Nina hummed in quiet agreement, having witnessed every low point of Elena's 2 years with the Carters firsthand, all the late-night secret calls she'd taken from the apartment's cracked bedroom window, when Elaina would quietly break down from unending verbal abuse. Ms. Hale's greatest strength has always been her refusal to mirror the cruelty others hand her. She could have cut every tie with ordinary communities entirely once she reclaimed her fortune, but instead she chose to lift up every person stuck in the same financial insecurity she once pretended to live through. That's the divide between her and the Carter family. They measure worth in material gain. She measures it in kindness given. Elaina glanced up, catching Sebastian's gaze across the flower beds, and lifted a hand in a soft, bright wave. He smiled back, pushing off the fountain's stone edge to walk over and join her, ready to sit and listen to the young girl's business pitch beside her. There was no space left in Elena's life for old regret or lingering resentment. The chapters filled with Margaret's sneers, Chloe's taunts, and Ethan's cowardly silence had long been sealed shut, buried beneath a life built on self-respect, mutual love, and endless quiet good. The people who had cast her aside out of greed would remain trapped in their own self-made cycle of remorse, but she had long since run free, chasing a future bright enough to drown out every old, bitter memory for good.